Consider it a cost-saving measure, the CEO said with a tight smile, sliding the envelope back across his desk. My heart pounded as I realized what he meant. The bonus I had worked for all year. Gone. Just like that. I caught a glimpse of the CEO's nephew, Eric, hovering in the hall with a self-satisfied smirk. In that sickening moment, it all made sense. He got my bonus. They handed my reward to a 27-year-old who'd been with the company barely a year, simply because he shared the CEO's last name. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 45 years old and I've been a senior project manager at Ashland Electronics for the past 16 years. I'm not the type to make a fuss or chase the spotlight. I've always been the steady hand keeping projects on track and under budget. Over the years, I built a reputation for reliability and integrity. Ashland Electronics grew from a tiny circuit board outfit into a major player, and I was proud of my part in that success. But pride doesn't pay the bills, and he had counted on this year's performance bonus to help cover some family expenses, replacing my car's failing transmission and maybe taking my wife and 2 kids on a modest vacation. Each December, management hands out performance-based bonuses to reward the hardest workers and keep talent from jumping ship. For 6 years straight, my team and I met every target thrown our way. Last quarter, we even delivered a major project under budget, saving the company a small fortune. My supervisor had told me I was likely in line for the highest tier bonus. So when the envelopes came around this afternoon, I was genuinely excited. I'd even started daydreaming about surprising my kids with a trip to Disney. Instead, I got a slap in the face. I tore open the company-sealed envelope at my desk, only to find a bland form letter. We regret to inform you that due to budget constraints, no performance bonus will be issued to you this year. I blinked, hoping I'd misread. Budget constraints? After such a profitable year? I glanced around and saw the same stunned expression on several co-workers' faces. Whispers spread quickly across the office. Apparently many of us who expected a bonus got the exact same letter. Before I could join the murmuring, my manager Gary beckoned me into his office and shut the door. He looked pained, almost ashamed. "Dan, I'm sorry," he sighed. "I fought for you and the team, but the decision came from higher up." By higher up, he meant our CEO, Richard Parker. Gary wouldn't meet my eyes. "It wasn't about performance at all," he admitted. "The budget was reallocated to a special case." He didn't have to spell it out. We both knew who that special case was. Richard's nephew, Eric, had apparently needed a generous year-end gift. I left Gary's office in a daze. I should have been walking out with a check to show my family, maybe planning a celebratory dinner. Instead, I walked back to my desk empty-handed and stunned. My hands trembled with anger as I sat down. Across the room, I spotted Eric leaning against a cubicle, laughing with an executive, an envelope poking out of his hand. Our eyes met briefly. The smug grin that spread across his face confirmed everything. He knew exactly what had happened, and he was gloating. My jaw tightened. I wanted so badly to stomp over and rip into him, to demand how he could live with himself enjoying a reward he didn't earn. But I knew an outburst would only hurt me. I forced myself to take a slow breath. I turned back to my computer and pretended to be absorbed in an email. Anything to avoid making a scene. From the corner of my eye, I saw Eric swagger out of the office, probably off to celebrate with the reward I'd worked so hard for. I sat there quietly seething, a single thought thundering in my head. This isn't right. I left work early that day, unable to pretend nothing was wrong. On the drive home, I simmered behind the wheel, replaying the day's events and fantasizing about what I'd say if I could speak my mind to Richard or his arrogant nephew. By the time I pulled into my driveway, one thing was crystal clear. This went beyond my missing bonus. It was about the betrayal of everyone who had worked hard only to be passed over in favor of the boss's family. I barely slept that night, anger keeping me up. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't let it go. I didn't have a plan yet. I just knew I wasn't going to let this injustice quietly fade away. I expected an uproar over our missing bonuses, but a heavy silence hung over the office instead. A few coworkers whispered about favoritism from the top, but no one dared to speak up openly. Marcia from sales pulled me aside, her voice low and bitter. "We all know where the money went, and it's not the first time." Her words gave me a sinking feeling. Not the first time. I realized I'd seen hints of this pattern before, even if I hadn't fully understood them at the time. Over the past year, Ever since CEO Richard Parker's nephew Eric joined the company, things had changed in subtle ways. Richard created a special projects manager position just for him. We all plastered polite smiles and welcomed the boss's nephew, even as we exchanged skeptical glances. In meetings, Eric sat beside his uncle, nodding along and occasionally tossing out a buzzword or two. He rarely contributed anything useful. I tried to ignore it at first. It didn't seem worth raising a fuss over a little nepotism. But as the months passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. I would prepare detailed project updates, only to have Richard publicly praise Eric for overseeing the successful work. Everyone on the team knew Eric had done none of the real heavy lifting. One colleague, Luis, told me that Eric had been assigned to help on a major client proposal his team was handling. Eric showed up to one meeting, spent it tapping on his phone, then ducked out early. Yet when that client signed a huge contract, Richard stood in front of the company and applauded his nephew for clinching the deal. Luis was livid. All he muttered to me afterward was, "What can we do?" He's family. We all felt that same mix of frustration and helplessness. The bonus fiasco was the final straw, but clearly the fire had been smoldering for a while. I thought about going to human resources, or even slipping an anonymous note to someone on the board, but without hard proof, it would be my word against the CEO's. Richard controlled the narrative here. Any complaint without evidence could be swept under the rug or even mark me as a troublemaker. If I was going to challenge this, I needed something concrete that he couldn't simply explain away. That evidence almost fell into my lap one evening, by chance. About a week after the bonus incident, I was working late, finishing a report in the quiet, empty office. As I passed a conference room near the executive suites, I heard raised voices through the cracked door. I recognized our chief financial officer, Alan, speaking in an urgent tone, and then Richard's unmistakable growl. I paused outside, heart thudding, and listened from the shadows. "Misallocating funds and hiding nepotism benefits isn't trivial, Richard. If the board finds out—" Alan was saying, his voice tense. "They won't find out," Richard cut in coldly. "Just finalize the year-end numbers and leave that report out." "I can't just sign off on this," the CFO protested. "It's wrong." "You can and you will," Richard snapped. "Drop it, Alan. That's an order unless you'd prefer to update your resume." A heavy silence followed. My pulse pounded in my ears as I realized what I'd just heard. After a long moment, I heard Alan mutter, "Understood." Chairs scraped on the floor. I slipped away down the corridor as quietly as I could. Seconds later, Alan exited the conference room, looking furious and defeated as he marched off. Richard came out, not long after, straightening his suit jacket with a scowl before retreating to his office. I stood there in the dark hallway, hands shaking with rage. My missing bonus wasn't an isolated incident at all. It was part of something much bigger and more corrupt. The CEO was actively covering up wrongdoing and strong-arming others to stay silent. Misallocating funds, hiding nepotism benefits. Those words echoed in my mind. It sounded like a smoking gun, proof of nepotism and financial misconduct, written down in a report that Alan wanted the board to see and Richard was determined to hide. In that moment, my path was clear. I needed to find that hidden report, the audit findings that Richard refused to share. It had to be buried somewhere on the company network, locked away but not inaccessible, and I was determined to dig it up. With that proof in hand, I could finally force the truth into the light. The time for enduring this injustice was over. It was time to bring everything out into the open. That night, I couldn't rest until I unearthed the evidence Alan had been talking about. If the CEO wanted to bury that audit report, I was determined to dig it up. After everyone left, I stayed behind in the office under the guise of working late. The building was quiet. I logged into the company network and started combing through every finance directory I could access. At first, I kept hitting access denied errors. They had already tried to lock everything down. I remembered our SharePoint kept version histories. Sure enough, buried in an _ archive subfolder was a file titled Q4 Audit Summary-confidential.xlsx. My breath caught. The title alone was a smoking gun. I clicked it open, half expecting my access to be blocked or the file to be gone. But after a moment, a spreadsheet flickered onto my screen. Rows of figures and notes filled the sheet. As I scrolled, the story came together in unmistakable terms. One tab was dedicated to bonus allocations. Next to each department head's name was a 0 under the bonus column, except one. Further down, under Special Projects, I saw Eric Parker's name and an eye-popping dollar amount beside it. My blood boiled seeing it confirmed. The entire management bonus pool had been siphoned to the CEO's nephew. The auditors had flagged it as an exception. The bonus had been reallocated to an executive's family member without any performance basis, a blatant conflict of interest. I clenched my jaw and kept reading. Another section revealed Richard had steered a contract to a company owned by one of his relatives, paying roughly 15% above market price with no competitive bidding. A blatant breach of procurement policy. I felt a chill. Now I understood why our procurement chief had abruptly resigned. She likely tried to blow the whistle on that deal and was pushed out. Line after line, the spreadsheet laid bare the rot that had set in at the company's upper ranks. Unauthorized expenses labeled as executive discretion, positions created with no job descriptions, Eric's role among them, relatives on the payroll who never seemed to clock in. The auditors had meticulously documented it all. The final tab was a summary addressed to the board's audit committee. It concluded, findings indicate multiple breaches of company policy, recommended action, full board review and intervention. I exhaled slowly and sat back. Even though I had expected something like this, seeing it confirmed in black and white still made my hands tremble with anger and a sense of vindication. The company's own auditors had documented everything, just as Alan had argued, and Richard had tried to sweep it under the rug. I wasn't supposed to have this file at all, and by morning it might vanish if Alan obeyed Richard. I had to act fast. I copied the file to a USB drive and emailed a copy to my personal account. No way would I let this evidence disappear. A calm determination steadied my nerves. I powered down my computer and quietly slipped out of the office. The anger was still there, but now I had something solid to back it up. Clutching that USB drive in my pocket, I knew exactly what had to be done next. The board of directors had to see this with their own eyes. I'd worked under these board members indirectly for years. Some even knew me from project presentations. They were responsible for the company's well-being, and I was certain they wouldn't be too pleased to learn how the CEO was abusing his power. Driving home in the dark, I rehearsed my plan in my head. I would send the audit report to each member of the board first thing in the morning. I'd do it anonymously, to keep the focus on the evidence and not on me. This wasn't about personal revenge anymore. It was about protecting the company from its own CEO. Richard had gambled that fear would keep everyone silent, but not everyone was willing to look the other way. I had the truth on my side, and I intended to let it speak for itself. By the time I got home, I was resolved. Come tomorrow, the board would know everything. At dawn the next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold beside me. My hands trembled as I drafted an email to the board of directors. I used a personal email under a generic name. I wanted the focus to be on the information, not on who delivered it. I marked it as urgent for board review of an internal audit. I kept the message brief and factual, explaining that an internal audit report had uncovered serious policy breaches and that I believed the board had not been made aware. I attached the audit report as proof. Before hitting send, I double-checked that the tone was calm and professional. It wasn't a rant or accusation, just a concerned employee ensuring the board saw critical information. Satisfied that it struck the right balance, I took a deep breath and clicked send. Nothing happened immediately, of course. I was left with the quiet of my kitchen and a gnawing mix of anxiety and anticipation. I sent the email to each board member's work address that I'd gathered with a bit of guesswork. Now all I could do was trust that at least one of them would read it and take it seriously. As I got ready for work, I kept compulsively checking my phone for any kind of response, but saw nothing. Board members might not check their company email right away. My message might sit unseen for hours or even land in a spam filter. The uncertainty was torturous. People went about business as usual while I silently counted the minutes, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every email chime made my stomach lurch. By 9:30, there was still no sign of any reaction. I began to worry. What if no one read it, or it never went through? I caught myself second-guessing the whole plan as I tapped my foot nervously under my desk. Around 10 a.m., Richard's assistant unexpectedly announced that he'd be out of the office for a while, something unheard of for him. Moments later, I saw CFO Allen stride across the floor with a bulging folder under his arm, heading straight for the elevators. Rumors quickly spread that the board had called an emergency meeting. Word even had it that 2 board members, including the chairman, were arriving in person. The office atmosphere shifted from normal to uneasy curiosity. People whispered theories about a surprise merger or a financial crisis. No one suspected the real reason yet. I kept my head down and feigned ignorance, but inside I was on pins and needles. It was working. The board was on it. The evidence I sent was in their hands, and by all appearances they weren't wasting any time. About an hour later, a company-wide email came from the board of directors, something unheard of on a Thursday. The terse memo announced an extraordinary board session that afternoon to discuss a critical compliance matter, and noted certain senior staff might be called upon. Everyone else was instructed to continue working and await further updates. You could hear a pin drop after that. Through the glass wall of his office, I saw my manager Gary reading the email with a puzzled frown. When he stepped out, he shot me a questioning look. I just gave a small shrug, feigning the same confusion as everyone else. Inside, I felt a cautious surge of satisfaction. The wheels were in motion, faster than I dared hope. Still, I knew this was just the beginning. There would be inquiries, likely a showdown with Richard, and plenty of fallout. I didn't know how it would all play out, but one thing was certain. The secret was out. Richard could no longer hide what he'd done. I allowed myself a small, grim smile before smoothing my expression again. The reckoning was coming, and I was determined to see it through. That afternoon, the board's extraordinary session took place behind closed doors. Though I wasn't in the room, the outcome became evident soon enough. By 3 p.m., an all-staff email announced that CEO Richard Parker was taking a leave of absence effective immediately. We all knew what that euphemism meant. The board chair would assume interim leadership, and a forensic audit was being launched to review certain recent management decisions. In plainer terms, Richard was done. He was escorted out of the building by early evening, walking right past the rows of employees whose trust he'd betrayed. Many of us furtively looked up from our desks as he passed. There was no applause or confrontation, only a heavy silence that followed him down the corridor. Perhaps in that silence, Richard finally understood that his power had evaporated, and he was alone. I caught a glimpse of him from the corner of my eye as he left. His face was ashen, his jaw set in angry defiance. His departure was swift and silent. No grand speeches, no farewells. In a single day, he went from untouchable CEO to out the door. Though I wasn't in the boardroom to witness it, whispers later circulated about the confrontation. When presented with the audit evidence, Richard reportedly tried to defend himself. Another board member supposedly slammed a printout of the bonus spreadsheet on the table, stating, "This is a clear violation of our trust." One account had him spluttering that he only did what was necessary for the business, a claim that met with stony silence from the directors. The chairman of the board allegedly fixed Richard with a hard stare and asked why he hadn't disclosed these obvious conflicts of interest. With the proof right in front of him, Richard had no good answer. Cornered and outnumbered, he could only bow to the inevitable. Allen, the CFO, was said to have calmly affirmed the audit's findings during the meeting, making clear that he had tried to raise these issues but had been overruled. The board's verdict was unanimous. His leadership was no longer tenable. As for Eric, the CEO's nephew, he didn't last much longer either. By the next morning, his desk was cleared out. A terse internal memo stated that Eric Parker is no longer with the company, with no further explanation. No one was surprised. Word travels fast in our company, and the story of the audit findings was already making the rounds in hushed tones. I heard that the board demanded Eric return the hefty bonus he'd been given, or face legal action for misappropriation of funds. Whether that was true or not, I wouldn't pity him either way. He slunk out just as quietly as his uncle, without so much as a goodbye or apology to anyone. Good riddance, we all thought. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Ashland Electronics changed perceptibly. There was shock at first. Seeing the CEO and his kin suddenly gone is not an everyday occurrence. But once the dust settled, I sensed a weight had lifted off the shoulders of many longtime employees. Departments that had been rife with rumor and resentment felt oddly lighter. Marcia from sales caught me in the hallway one afternoon and, with a tentative smile, said, "I think we might actually get a fair shake here again." I knew what she meant. Trust had been bruised, but the healing had begun. Officially, the board kept details of the investigation under wraps, but actions spoke louder than words. An ethics committee swept through, reviewing policies on bonuses and vendor contracts. Within a week, they reinstated the performance bonus program for managers, this time with board oversight to prevent any more special reallocations. When I received a revised bonus payout, belated but intact, in my bank account, I felt a flicker of pride. Not for the money itself, though it certainly helped my family, but for what it represented. It meant that the good work of my colleagues and I was recognized after all, and that fairness had been restored, at least in part. One afternoon, as I was packing up to head home, CFO Allen walked by my desk. He paused and gave me a long, meaningful look. For a second I felt my stomach tighten. Did he know I was the one who had forwarded the report? But then he simply said, "Have a good evening, Dan," with a nod that conveyed more than his words. I nodded back. We both understood without saying it. The right thing had been done. In the end, Richard never offered me or anyone else an apology. And to be honest, I never expected one. He certainly never confronted me directly about what I'd done. By the time the dust settled, I suspect he was too busy dealing with the wreckage of his own making to worry about a mere manager like me. And that was fine. Watching him face the consequences of his actions was apology enough as far as I was concerned. The day he was forced to walk out of this company was the day he effectively said sorry for everything without uttering a word. I went home that night and finally told my wife everything. She listened quietly as I recounted the whole saga, from the bonus that never came to the email I'd sent and the upheaval that followed. When I was done, she squeezed my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." I realized I was proud of myself too. I had stood up for what was right, not only for my own sake, but for the colleagues who had been wronged alongside me. That weekend, I made good on my earlier promise. I booked that family vacation I'd been talking about. With my belated bonus arriving and my heart lighter than it had been in months, I felt we'd all earned a little celebration. A week later, our interim CEO, the board chairman, held a company-wide town hall meeting. Without going into gory details, he acknowledged that mistakes had been made at the highest levels and promised a renewed commitment to transparency and fairness. The applause that filled the auditorium told me the staff was ready to move on and rebuild trust. For the first time in a long while, it felt like everyone, from the board on down, was on the same page about our values. Back at work, there was a new atmosphere of cautious optimism. The cloud of favoritism and fear had lifted. People went back to focusing on their jobs rather than office politics. Those of us who had quietly endured the nepotism found ourselves exchanging relieved smiles in the hallways. One morning by the coffee machine, I overheard a couple of coworkers chatting about how the air feels clearer around here now. They didn't know who had blown the whistle, but I could hear the gratitude in their voices for whoever did. I kept quiet and sipped my coffee with a small smile. I knew exactly what they meant. We had all learned something through this ordeal. That integrity and fairness weren't just lofty ideals posted on a mission statement. They were real, and they mattered to all of us. For me personally, the experience was a powerful reminder that sometimes you have to speak up even if your voice shakes. One person's courage can make a difference. I had worried I might stand alone, but in the end I wasn't alone at all. The truth stood with me, and so did everyone who cared about this company. As for me, I hadn't done any of this for praise or thanks. I was content to let the results speak for themselves. If anything, staying out of the spotlight felt safer, and more in line with why I'd done it, not for accolades, but for integrity. I remained just another face in the crowd, and that was fine by me. Knowing that I'd helped set things right was its own reward. In the quiet weeks after the scandal, I often found myself pausing in the middle of the workday, feeling a sense of contentment. The company I'd given so many years to was back on track, and the people who made it successful were respected again. In the grand scheme of things, that was all the closure I ever needed. In life, you don't always get apologies from those who wrong you, but sometimes you find out you never really needed them after all.